Hi, welcome back to Art by Brooke. So, as you can see, my hair is really different. I actually dyed it red a couple of months ago, and now I'm just letting it fade back to my normal blonde, but I also cut off a ton of my hair. So, it's still me, but I look a little different. So, I was at Michael's the other day, and I saw some ornaments, and I grabbed them, and they're the same kind of ornaments that I have done on this channel before, but I realized I hadn't done a how-to video on how to paint pour them. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So I have these ornaments. They're kind of paper mache cardboard feeling. They're not very heavy and they're kind of papery, so you have to be careful with too much liquid, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do a paint pour on these. Okay, so the first thing I do is take off the tag. So I did that on this one already. And then I just make sure that there's no residue, which there's a little bit on here, so I'll just kind of scrape that off. So then I usually take painter's tape, so you can use masking tape or something like that, and cover up the top part. So with this I actually get really close as I can to the base. Because you don't want this part to be covered in paint. This gets a little tricky because sometimes, like what's happening now, it doesn't actually want to stick to the tape, so I have to stick the tape to itself. And then you want to be careful not to pull on this because it might just slide right off the ribbon. And I just kind of tape up near the top. You don't have to tape the whole thing unless you're kind of a messy painter, so that's up to you. I know that when I'm painting it's going to sit like this and I'll just pour right onto here, so I don't really need it all the way up here. So the next thing I do is I add gesso to all of the sides of the ornament. So my favorite is this Liquitex gesso, but you can also get black and see-through, like clear. So here's the black I have. It's the only one I've tried, but I like this one so far. So I usually just put some on, and then, oops, there's a little dried piece there. And then I use like a foam brush to go ahead and get it all the way around. This doesn't have to be perfect. It's just adding a little bit of protection to the base cardboard and also something for the paint to stick to. This part isn't necessary, but I think that it's pretty important if you're worried at all about the bottom layer of material. So you can do this on wood too. I usually do, just to make sure it sticks evenly, but you don't have to. So this is the part you'll probably get some on your hands unless you used gloves. You can also just be patient and let it dry before you start on the next part, but I'm not being patient for this video. So there that is. So I would go ahead and at this point get a cup to set this on so that it doesn't stick to your surface. And I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. So now it's time to mix up a couple of paint colors. I actually have most of my paints pre-mixed in bottles, but I wanted to mix one up just to show you how I do it in case you haven't seen my other videos, and explain to you a little bit about the different consistencies. So in my bottles, it's a mixture of Floetrol, a little bit of water, and the Artist Loft Flow Acrylic. Some of my bottles I use heavier body acrylic, so I have to mix it a little differently. For this cup, I'm actually using a craft acrylic. This one right here, metallic blue. It's Sapphire by Craft Smart. And because it's a craft paint, it's actually thinner than the flow acrylic. So you want to keep in mind how thick your paint is when you're mixing. So I'll show you the consistency I like to get it to, but just be aware that depending on the different kinds you use, you'll want to mix it a little differently. You may need to add more Floetrol, a little bit more water, or sometimes a little bit less of both of those. So I will go ahead and pour some into this cup. I usually start with just kind of covering the bottom. This one's kind of full of a lot of air, unfortunately. Okay. There we go. So I just kind of cover the bottom just enough to start with. I don't need a ton because these are pretty small. And then I have a huge thing of Floetrol. It's kind of hard to see, but I will go ahead and pour some of that in. Now Floetrol can start to get chunks in it as you use it and it's been opened, so I do recommend filtering it through like some pantyhose or like a cheesecloth, but I'm not going to follow my own advice right now. I usually am too lazy to do that. So I start with approximately half and half of both, and then you can adjust from there depending on how it feels. So go ahead and start to mix it up. This is kind of the fun part. Now this gets a lot harder if you're trying to make something like silver or white because you won't know when it's fully mixed, but you just have to mix longer than you think you need to. Okay, so this is actually a really good consistency already. Something else to be aware of, Floetrol is white when it comes out of the bottle, but it does dry clear, and it dries matte. So right now the color looks nice, but it will be more vivid when it dries. So keep that in mind as well when you're kind of mixing your colors. They will look more vivid and more colorful once they dry. Okay, so the consistency I like is to just kind of have it run off the stick in a steady stream, but not too fast because you don't want it to be watery. And I just kind of get it to about that. So I don't really have exact measurements. I know some people like to do that, but I just kind of go by feel and then adjust as necessary. There are sometimes different times that you want to have it thicker or thinner, and it depends on the type of pour you're doing. But for this pour, I'm kind of in the middle, so hopefully this gives you a good idea to just see how it flows. Kind of get a good idea for where to start for yourself. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside and get everything ready to start pouring. So I figured I would show you two different techniques. For this first one, I'm going to do a flip cup, which is kind of a classic paint pouring technique, at least in what's popular right now. So this is actually a little tiny shot glass. Those are great for using for small things, and they're disposable, but as you can see I use them a couple of times before I get rid of them. So none of that is wet paint, it's all dry. If you're really worried about how it's going to look, like if you're doing a professional canvas, I would try to avoid using something like this because some of the little pieces can flake off, but on something so small I can actually pick them out pretty easily if I notice them. So I'm going to start by layering the colors in the cup, and I'm using blue, white, black, and that metallic blue. I'm going to go ahead and start doing some layers. Now if you want cells, which are the little circles that show up in a paint pour, you want to kind of get more air into the pour, so you can pour from higher up and let it drip in, which forces air down. Or if the bottle's kind of empty like this one, you can kind of like squirt really hard and have it come out. If you do that with a full bottle, it might be too much and might come out too fast, but you can kind of experiment with that as well. So I'm going to add some more black. Actually, haven't added black yet, so I'm going to add some black. And then some more white, which I'm going to drip from a little higher up. I'm going to add some bubbles. And also, if you've recently mixed your paint or shaken the bottle, that adds some more air bubbles in it as well. If you want to avoid the air bubbles, definitely let your paint and bottles sit before you use them. I'm going for the cells, so I'm mixing up before I put it in. Whoops, that's okay, because that's actually just going to get covered over when I flip the cup. Okay. White, and let's see if I can use some black to force some of that white and blue down. Okay, let's do more of the dark blue. Oops, it's almost empty. So I'm guessing this is probably plenty of paint, but I like to err on the side of too much. Do a little bit more white, and then I think we can flip. Alrighty. So with a small canvas like this, you can just go ahead and flip straight onto it, but I'm going to show you how I usually do flips, especially if someone's nervous, because this is a pretty easy way to do it. So you take whatever you want. So I called it a canvas, but it's actually just kind of a cardboard piece. But you turn it upside down, kind of try to have the cup in the middle, and then put your non-dominant hand, actually you can do it with either hand, but I usually do my non-dominant hand on top and hold the bottom with my dominant hand, and you hold them tight together, and then you flip. And then you can go ahead and set it back down. I have it set on a cup that's upside down. And then I usually just let it sit for just a little bit. I'm going to try to focus my camera on the paint instead of the cup. Okay. Try to let the paint kind of settle because it sits in the, well, previously bottom of the cup, but it sits up here on the top. And we want it to go all the way down to the surface. Okay, I just let it sit for basically another 30 seconds or so. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to flip. Now I want to hold on to one of the edges because when you pull this, it actually has a little bit of a seal. And so it could just pull the whole thing up and then fall and it would just be a mess. So hold on to one of your edges and then go ahead and pull your cup. And I like to pull the cup and move it away so that I don't get lines all over it, which actually is kind of like the ribbon technique that I've seen people do. So you could totally do that if you want, but I like to just pull it away. And sometimes tap the excess on the corners. Wow, that's super pretty. Okay, so I'm actually going to do that because there's some more in the cup. Just because the corners can be hard to get the pour to go to. And this will be covered mostly anyway, but it'll just help the paint flow over the edges more. And I need to work quickly because this is going down the edges here. Super gorgeous. So before you tilt, you can actually blow on it gently or use a torch. I'm just going to blow on it because my torch isn't working right now. Now I blew a little hard, so it kind of pushed some of the paint, but I was trying to pop some of the air bubbles. So just be careful of that. I'm just going to go ahead and try to tilt over some of the corners. Getting all the edges, which it's hard on this star shape because it runs off the sides very easily. So right now I'm kind of guiding it down. And this will all stretch out as it, you know, pours and settles. So it's okay that I'm tapping it with my finger. And now let's get it down this side. Oops, I'm kind of out of frame, sorry about that. Alright. Come on down the sides. This is the slow part. When it gets to the last two edges or so. Whoops. Kind of grabbed the top of the hanging thread. Alright. So I'm going to set this down and kind of use some of the excess to guide it over the edges. So now you can let it sit for a little while, and I'm going to go and wipe my hands off. So I'm so sorry. I thought that my camera was going, but it had turned off. So I started this without giving you the introduction. So basically a puddle pour is where you don't pour into a cup. You pour directly onto your canvas or your shape, and you do puddles where you're layering the different colors. This helps keep the colors from getting muddy, especially if you want to use contrasting colors, colors that are on opposite sides of the color wheel, where they would mix together and make mud if you actually mix them together. But those colors tend to look super nice next to each other. Same with turquoise and orange, purple and yellow, things like that. Well, I'm having problems with my camera, so hopefully it got the footage I did before. I'm going to go ahead and just keep layering and then try to tilt this. Another thing you can do to keep the colors from mixing is also do layers of white in between whatever colors you're doing. I'm going to add a couple of more puddles because that one's starting to go off the edge. side ones. This is a lot of fun because you get kind of a crazy shape as you go, and they start kind of going together. Let's go ahead and do some more gold. I'm kind of running out of this, so there's not a lot left. I think we're close to having enough paint, so I'm just going to go ahead and do some white in between, and then I will start tilting. There we go. It's already starting to go over the edge. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start tilting it. Just trying to be careful that they don't go over each other too much, because I want to keep some of the shape. I'm actually really liking the way this looks. Come on, let's go over the edge. There we go. Now circles are really fun for flip cups as well, because you can actually get a lot that turn out looking like planets or like galaxies, just because of the shape. I think it just lends itself well to those type of things. So that's another thought, is to possibly do your flip cup on a circle. I just thought the circle would work better for this technique. Okay, so I'm just guiding it over the edges and making sure it's going over every side. And then you don't want too much to stay on top, because it could warp it or it could crack as it's drying if it's way too much paint. So I'm just going to try to pour some more off. I like this shape, so I'm going to try to keep that on here. Okay, I'm just going to tilt some more to this side. I see the edge is a little bit kind of pulling thin, so I'm going to tilt some more over that edge. And I think I touched this side too. I probably should have just told you to tape the whole thing, because obviously I'm not very careful about this. Okay. Alrighty. I think we're pretty much done. I'm going to go ahead and set this back on the cup. And then I will put them next to each other and we can do a close-up. Alrighty, here are the two ornaments. So let's go ahead and take a close look. I love what happened here in the middle. These layers are really cool. I definitely don't do enough puddle pours. I need to do some more of those, because there's some really cool results you can get. So there's not a lot to zoom around on like usual for a canvas, but you can kind of see it close up, which is nice. And then we come over here. This one has some cool cells. This is what I was talking about before, which if you've done paint pouring, you know what cells are, but hopefully some people who are brand new to this are watching this and learning some new techniques. Let's see, let's go over here. I'm trying to focus in on that little, what I think looks like a star tail or comet tail or something like that. So now all that's left to do is to leave them completely alone and let them dry. It could take 24 hours up to 48 hours. It really depends on what it is. In my experience, these things dry fairly quickly, so probably by the next day they'll be good. But make sure, if you're testing it, to test one of the bottom parts or the edges before you touch the middle. The middle can sometimes stay wet a lot longer. When in doubt, just leave it for at least 2 days and don't mess with it. So once these are dry, you want to seal them if you're going to be touching them a lot or hanging them on a tree, to keep them from getting scratched or things like that. So what I do to finish them off is, I usually with these, I'll turn them over and paint the background solid, like usually a white, or in this case I might do red, and then you can write the person's name on it, or the year, or like a little memory. And then once you're done with that and letting that dry, I go in and spray this on top. So this is Rust-Oleum Crystal Clear Enamel, or you can use really any type of varnish if you'd like, but I do think that varnish tends to be kind of sticky. Now this can be sticky too if you don't let it dry long enough, and you definitely don't want to store these touching each other in storage like for the next year. So make sure that you get parchment paper to put in between them. Don't do wax paper, that tends to stick too. Make sure it's like a parchment paper. And put that in between them for storage, and try not to store them somewhere too warm. I will post the dried paintings on my Instagram account, which is linked in the description down below. And remember, the Floetrol does dry matte, so these won't be super shiny at all when they're done, maybe just where the metallics were. And so that's another thing that the Rust-Oleum helps, is it brings back that shine, and they look really pretty, just like they did when you first poured them. Make sure if you do spray that, you do it outside or in a garage with the door open, something like that. It's very strong smelling, and you can get lightheaded using it, so make sure you're really careful about that. I will also link all of my colors in the description below. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did, and share this video with your friends. Leave a comment down below which colors you would choose for your ornaments. Are you going to be making any of these for Christmas? And click subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to hit the bell so you get notifications every time I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.